there seems to be some, not confusion or discrepancy, but there are a lot of numbers floating around. And where are we with the bond sales and the authorization? And more importantly, I think for the people who want to follow this, the work schedule. What's going to happen this summer? Is everything that would be, I don't know if it's, I guess we have to do it for capital year budgets. You can't do FY12 versus FY11. Is everything on schedule? There's money, we don't have any problems, or do we?
Well, there are always problems if you're implementing the largest capital program in the country. It's hard to stretch everything that far. We had the largest construction season in Illinois last year that we ever had, and that's going to happen again this year. It's going to be bigger this year. So I think it's going very well. I think our greatest concern is we do have an adverse appellate court ruling in Chicago on the Wirtz case, which we think is a minor blip, but that's probably the one that's causing people the most concern. But it doesn't create an immediate change because we got to stay in that order and it's under appeal.
That money it's in limbo to a degree.
Yeah.
The plan is now continuing to spend as was always planned, or is there contingency plan to not spend the money that may be in question, at least from that?
Yeah, the state share of the overall capital plan is about $16 billion. We have a little less than $100 million in a protest fund in the Wirtz case. So that doesn't have a big impact on a capital plan that large.
What's the total amount for work that is going to begin this summer?
What was authorized by the General Assembly in January by I believe it was unanimous, there might have been one vote against it, by a unanimous vote, which is also a big stamp of approval, when members of both parties continue the second year of the capital program with a bond authorization by unanimous vote. We think that was a big stamp of approval. But they approved another $5 billion in bond issuance. It will take us a few months to get all those bonds issued, and we'll watch our cash balances very carefully. There's a complicated sequence here. The General Assembly acts, it authorizes bond sales. At the same time, you have to plan and engineer and design the projects, and then you have to sell the bonds to actually have the cash, and then you have to let the contracts. And only then do people start showing up to work. So sometimes you mentioned confusion earlier, sometimes that's where the confusion is along that sequence. But with that new $5 billion in authorization, we're going to have the largest construction season ever in Illinois.
They authorized the sale of $5 billion.
That's right.
How many have been sold?
We haven't sold any yet out of that new authorization. And one of the reasons we haven't is we have a little cash left over from last year's bond sales that'll start to flow out to projects that are partway through. They're authorized. We've got the money in the bank to pay for them, and so those funds will flow first, and then we'll add to those available funds through another bond sale later this spring.
Would you expect to have those sold by June 1st?
No, I don't want to pin down a date. There is a question of the right time in the market. There is a question of how what we do on the budget affects how the bond rating agencies and the bond investors view the sale of our long-term bonds. There's a question of when do we precisely need the cash, and there's a question of whether the bond market looks at the Wirtz case more unfavorably than we do. You have to deal with perceptions in the bond market, and if they're a little worried about that case and what the Supreme Court's going to do, we might have to pay a little extra interest for that money. We don't want to do that, so when you let all those things settle out, we'll keep the capital program moving.
Are you worried about the Wirtz case? Is the administration worried, or is it a contingency that has been planned?
Well, we didn't plan it, but you don't ever plan for somebody to sue you. But it is a contingency. We have a stay by the Supreme Court. That's the thing that leaves us the most reassured when the court says whatever the lower court has done is not in effect yet until we hear your appeal. That's very reassuring. We're very hopeful that the Supreme Court will rule our way. If the Supreme Court does not rule our way, we believe the General Assembly is prepared to take further legislative action to reauthorize the program. When the governor supports something and the legislature is willing to continue it by unanimous vote, Any problems that come along, we can fix.
Now, is it, I don't know if this is policy or just, capital plan question. Is the administration focusing more on reauthorizing what may get struck down in wards, or would the cigarette tax be a better fix? I don't want to say, do you support?
Well, it's both. It's both. The administration does support any necessary reauthorizations, and Governor Quinn does support the cigarette tax and believes it would be a very reliable source for paying off these bonds. We can issue the bonds and we have to pay them off, and they're paid off with taxes and revenues, most of which have already been passed. But the cigarette tax would bolster that and would help us.
Okay, back to some of the numbers. We have a $5 billion authorization to sell, but you said we had some cash left over from last year. How much do we have? How much would we need to get through the construction season this summer?
The last time I checked the number, it was nearly $2 billion. That sounds like a lot of money to have in the bank, but we do have substantial balances that are available, and contractors are a lot more willing to bid when they know you've got the money to pay them. And in the capital plan, we do, unlike some other parts of state government.
We heard from CDB, they apparently weren't aware of the extra authorization. There was some question of vertical buildings versus road projects from IDOT. When it comes time from an OMB standpoint to authorize or release money, does it matter if it's a building going up or a road going out or any of the other projects that may be? Or is it just literally, here's the money, the numbers on this page, get authorized and the projects get done?
Well, the General Assembly, when it did the appropriation and the authorization, put it in categories. So we have to spend in accordance with their categories. They put, in terms of the overall program of the state share, they put about $9.4 billion in the transportation categories. There are multiple categories. Some are for roads, some are for public transit. And they put about $6.6 billion in everything else, which most people call the vertical, the non-road portion. So there's a substantial portion of each. There's money for each. The non-road portion, the vertical portion, and the CDB people will tell you all about this, it does take it a little longer to design it. If you're designing a new veterans home in Chicago, that's one of the projects in the bill, it takes a while to acquire the land to build it on. It takes a while to design the veterans home. It takes a while to get the federal approval because you get a lot of federal support for dealing with disabled and older veterans. And then it takes you a while to build it after design. So the vertical projects are a little more complicated, but we have lots of them in the pipeline because CDB worked very hard last year to keep architects and engineers and other designers working very hard on the projects we authorized last year. So in many ways, last year you saw a lot of roads actually being built. You saw a lot of vertical being designed. And this year, those vertical designs are going to start going up. And I think people will really notice them much more this year.
I had another question, and it jumped out of my head as soon as we started talking about building versus design. I absolutely hate it.
That can happen. That can happen.
As I fill the time, we're not building new roads, right? It's more updating and resurfacing.
We have some projects that are going to involve new roads. The governor's been working with the governor of Indiana on a cooperative project. That's what states should do that are working together for the region's economy, called the Indiana Expressway, that will connect Interstate 65 in Indiana over to Interstate 55 in Illinois. In the Joliet area, it'll be a little south of where Interstate 80 goes across. So that's a new road project. Most of them, though, are repair and rebuilding of existing roads that are old. Our interstate system has been around now for 50 years in many cases and needs some rebuilding. And our bridges have to be safe. I mean, we witnessed what happened in Minneapolis when you don't do a good job of maintaining bridges. It wasn't very fun if you were sitting on a bridge in your car or even walking, but they were in their cars. So that's really what the emphasis of it is. But there's also public transit in the transportation of substantial amounts, and airport construction. One of the things that was authorized in the Capitol bill was more land acquisition for the third airport, which is a new South Suburban Airport, is a new construction airport that we hope to have done in the next few years.
The question that I had forgotten was, walk me through the next timeline. We've got $5 billion that will be sold that should cover the rest of the projects this year and likely take us into next year. How does it then roll out as we move forward through FY12 and sort of into the next couple
Well,
of years?
the idea of the capital plan was to do it over 3 to 5 years, and the other idea of the plan, to maintain everyone's confidence of it, was to not authorize all the bonds the first year. It'd be hard to sell them all then anyway. But so we sold the bonds, authorized to sell the bonds the first year, and then that's why this stamp of approval is so important. The General Assembly has to come back in and by a 60% vote approve the bonds for the second year. If there was something going on with the program that the members of the General Assembly didn't like, they can withhold that support, and they did not. So we still have a third notch of that to do in order to really complete the program. So we authorized about $4.6 billion in bonds the first year. This year we expect to spend about $6.9 out of that new authorization, and in the third year it's something like $4.8 billion. So we'll have to come back and ask for that last piece next year.
Anything else on the capital plan that I need to be asking?
No, it's the biggest job creator in Illinois. It's one of the reasons that Illinois led the Midwest in job creation in 2010. When you're coming out of a recession, that is crucial. We had a lot of construction workers in Illinois who were involved in the housing industry, and the housing industry has pretty well gone bust. We all know that due to the financial crisis. So our ability to have the largest capital program in Illinois is a big plus for our state's economy, not just for the people that are getting those jobs, but because of the effect it has on the economy when people spend that money they earn, and because of the efficiency it helps create in the economy. When you reduce congestion on roads, when you improve freight rail, which we're doing in the capital program through our CREATE program, when you improve high-speed rail, when you add airports that are needed, these create efficiencies in your economy that help you for years to come.